Frederick Douglass was born around 1817 in Tuckahoe, Maryland. The setting is a rural plantation, where enslaved people live in small, crude cabins surrounded by vast fields. His mother, Harriet Bailey, is separated from him at a young age, and Douglass grows up without really knowing her. She dies when he is still a child, leaving him with only vague memories of her nighttime visits. This early separation from his family becomes a defining aspect of his life, highlighting the emotional toll that slavery takes on family bonds. The first traumatic event Douglass remembers is seeing his Aunt Hester being whipped by Captain Aaron Anthony, his master. The scene takes place in the barn, where the sound of the whip cracking against her skin echoes through the air. Douglass, just a child, watches in horror as Hester's back is torn apart by the blows. The setting is cold and bleak, with the barn serving as a stark symbol of the cruelty that enslaved people endure. This moment plants the seed of fear and hatred towards slavery in Douglass's young mind. When Douglass is about 7 or 8 years old, he is sent to Baltimore to live with Hugh and Sophia Auld. The city of Baltimore is very different from the plantation. The streets are busy, with people going about their daily lives, and the buildings are close together. In the Auld household, Douglass finds a temporary sense of comfort. Sophia Auld is kind to him at first, even teaching him how to read. They sit in a small, cozy room where Sophia begins showing him the alphabet, marking a major shift in Douglass's life. However, this peaceful scene changes when Hugh Auld discovers what his wife is doing. He forbids her from teaching Douglass, saying that educating a slave would ruin him. From then on, the warmth in Sophia's character fades, and she becomes more controlling. Although Hugh Auld stops Douglass's formal education, Douglass is determined to learn. In secret, he teaches himself to read and write. Whenever he can, he sneaks away to read newspapers or books. Sometimes he befriends local boys and tricks them into helping him learn. The city setting provides opportunities that the isolated plantation could not. These quiet moments of learning, often done in secret corners, represent Douglass's growing desire for freedom. He becomes more aware of the injustices of slavery and begins to dream of escaping to a better life. After the death of Captain Anthony, Douglass is sent back to the plantation. The atmosphere feels heavier and more oppressive than ever. The wide fields and rough cabins serve as a constant reminder of his lack of freedom. At this point, he is treated like property, lined up alongside livestock to be evaluated by potential heirs. The cold detachment with which enslaved people are traded and inherited dehumanizes them, reducing them to mere objects. Douglass's time back on the plantation rekindles his longing for freedom, but it also deepens his despair. Douglass's situation worsens when he is sent to work for Edward Covey, a man known for breaking rebellious slaves. Covey's farm is large and remote, surrounded by dense woods and fields that seem to stretch on forever. The physical labor is relentless, and Covey frequently whips Douglass. For months, Douglass is subjected to grueling work and constant beatings. The farm feels like a prison, and Douglass begins to lose hope. But one day, in a moment of desperation, Douglass fights back against Covey. The two struggle in the field, and although Douglass does not defeat him physically, he regains a sense of dignity. This moment is a turning point, as Douglass resolves never to let anyone break his spirit again. After his time with Covey, Douglass is sent to live with William Freeland, who is kinder than Covey. Freeland's farm, while still a place of enslavement, feels less suffocating. Douglass begins secretly teaching other enslaved people to read, using the dim light in the quarters at night. These lessons take place in small, hidden corners of the farm, where Douglass and his fellow enslaved men gather in secret. Together they discuss plans to escape, dreaming of freedom in hushed whispers. However, their plans are discovered, and Douglass is thrown into jail. Eventually, Douglass is returned to Hugh Auld in Baltimore, where he begins working in the shipyards. The shipyards are noisy, with the constant sound of hammers and saws filling the air. Douglass works alongside free men, and for the first time he earns a small wage for his labor. But Hugh Auld takes most of his earnings, frustrating Douglass's attempts to save money for an escape. Despite this, the shipyards represent a step closer to freedom. Douglass feels that he is inching toward independence, even if the path is still difficult. In 1838, Douglass makes his final escape. He travels by train and steamboat, moving through towns and cities where the risk of being captured is ever present. The journey is tense, and each stop brings new dangers. But eventually, Douglass reaches the North, where slavery is illegal. The busy streets of New York feel like a world away from the rural plantations of the South. The buildings loom tall, and Douglass breathes the air of freedom for the first time. In this new setting, he marries Anna, a free black woman, and they move to New Bedford, Massachusetts. In New Bedford, Douglass begins his new life as a free man. The town is peaceful, with quiet streets and bustling shipyards. The air feels lighter here, and Douglass is amazed by how different life is in the North. He starts reading The Liberator, an abolitionist newspaper, and soon becomes involved in the anti-slavery movement. His first speech at an abolitionist convention is well received, marking the beginning of his career as a public speaker. The halls where Douglass speaks are filled with people eager to hear his story, and the sound of his voice echoes through the room as he tells them about the horrors of slavery. From the plantation fields to the busy streets of the North, Douglass's journey is one of transformation. Each location, from the rural South to the industrial North, shapes his experience, but through it all, his desire for freedom and his belief in the power of education remain constant. His story is not just about escaping physical bondage, but about reclaiming his dignity and voice as a human being.